Today, I'm pleased to introduce an industry thought leader many of you know, and who has a well-earned reputation of seeing around future corners to uncover ideas that are not yet in view. Tom Blishock is the chairman and CEO of the Dialogic Group and a strategic futurist helping organizations achieve growth in the new competitive landscape. Recognized as a change agent for digital organizational transformation, he brings a relevant perspective to the post-COVID retail landscape. I had the opportunity to participate in a panel discussion facilitated by Tom a few weeks ago, and we both agreed that the content he shared during that event was relevant to the strategic partner meetings we've scheduled this week. During the session, we'll be using the polling feature within Zoom, and time permitting, we'll also be responding to your questions in the Q&A screen that you can find on the bottom of your Zoom screen. Without further delay, I'm happy to turn it over to you, Tom. Welcome.
Good morning, everybody. It is absolutely great to be here today. And we're going to share a story with you about post-COVID-19. We're going to share a story with you about what we think will happen next. But more importantly, we're going to share a story of what we think you ought to be doing right now in preparation for post-COVID-19. Our conversation today centers on de-invest to reinvest. We're going to try to provide you some perspectives on strategy, what we think is a revival opportunity, what we think is a re-engineering opportunity, what we think is a reinvention opportunity. But more importantly, this is not just about COVID-19. It's about the economy, it's about social disruption, and it's about an impending election. So we're in a space here where we think that much has to be considered in go-forward strategies for both retailers and manufacturers as they prepare for this post-COVID-19 activity, as well as preparing for the back half of 2020. Our conversations really will center today for the next 19 minutes or so around what C-level executives are talking to us about. We've interviewed about 100 of them, both retailers and manufacturers, and their messaging is quite clear. We'll spend a little time on some post-COVID-19 scenarios. We're going to ask you to choose. We're going to ask you a polling question. We have some strong thinking from, again, these interviews on most likely emerging shopping behaviors, of which both retailers and manufacturers must take into consideration to some degree. Not everyone will occur, but many of them will. We'll talk about new work lifestyles. And we'll spend some time talking through how retailers and manufacturers are most likely going to be affected as we enter the back half of 2020. And finally, never like to leave you without some thinking about what should be done. So we'll spend a few minutes on key strategic steps, which we think are mandatory for post-COVID-19 success. So in our conversations, and we conducted these conversations between April and May of 2020. We talked to over 100 C-level executives who were from retailers, manufacturers, wholesale distributors, service providers. About 91% believe that they are going to be able to compete in this post-COVID-19 retail landscape, at least in the food and beverage industry. The rest of the industry, the rest of the retail industry, will not fare anywhere near as well as the food and beverage, mass, drug, et cetera industry. But many of these folks talked to us about their challenges, what they were dealing with. So even though they said they believe they're going to be able to compete, 50% plus expressed concerns about survivability. By the way, in their current form, in their current organizational and operational structure. We are expecting significant changes in both retail and manufacturing organizations as they face this next 6 months. We'll talk about that in just a second. 60% believe that their organizations didn't have the skill sets to compete, and primarily the digital skill sets, the organizational transformational skill sets, and more importantly, the analytical skill sets that were needed in understanding a pace of change which is virtually unparalleled at retail. 71% indicated that they must absolutely improve their decision-making processes. So instead of product development taking 18 months, why not 6 weeks? Why not 8 weeks? Instead of us collaborating in separate fashions, Why not collaborate differently? Why not change the decision-making process? And 74% were concerned about the ability to adapt quickly in this rapidly changing state. What's so important about this little survey is that there is a tremendous amount of optimism. So let's first of all start our conversation off by saying that we are in another range of opportunities as well as challenges. And as we go through this conversation, be clear that we need to think about structure, we need to think about skills, we need to think about how we essentially make decisions, how we collaborate, and we need to think about speed. So when we had these conversations, what became very clear is that there's a degree of ongoing uncertainty. Who do we compete with? How do we compete? What should our organization look like? How should we operate differently? How should we collaborate differently? And how should we manage our cash? So we essentially in these conversations summarized 3 key strategic concerns. Because there is so much uncertainty, how do I conserve cash? How do I change my operating model? And how do I essentially compete in this new landscape and this new, what we think is going to be a pretty important partner ecosystem? Our hypothesis is to win going forward, de-investing of 30 to 35% of the operating expenses of the organization is critical. That is eliminating duplication. That is eliminating redundancy. That is eliminating unnecessary functions, while at the same time reinvesting 15 to 20% that in new capabilities, new collaboration capabilities, new digital capabilities, new merchandising capabilities, new assortment capabilities, new technologies which actually change the pace and the ability of an organization to execute. We spent a fair amount of time with one of my partners, Alvarez and Marcel, to develop some potential scenarios. And be very clear, as a futurist, none of these scenarios are going to play out exactly as we have them here. But let's go through the 5 of them rather quickly. V-shaped is best case. Recovery time in the economy is 1 to 3 months. The impact to retailers and manufacturers is really low. The liquidity risk is moderate because startup will be difficult. And the degree of change will be a little bit in organizational and SG&A, some change in assortment and pricing, some change in stores, and some change in inventory supply chain. So in all these 5 cases, there is a degree of change which should be considered in the back half 2020 plan and the go forward 2021 plan. Next is a U-shaped curve, which is basically a 3 to 9 month recovery. Again, low to medium impact. It's 10% or so of the business, moderate liquidity risk, but the level of change is significant. Restructuring or the organization, restructuring SG&A, thinking very heavily about assortment and pricing, thinking about redirecting, redesigning stores, thinking about inventory. What's so very important about this is that as we move forward, we're going to see more and more complexity of change develop. This swoosh-shaped curve, 9 to 24 months. By the way, just so everyone on the call knows, that it took us about 3 years plus to get out of the pandemic of 1918. Not saying we're going to be in the same space here, but be very clear that in the swoosh shape, there is a lot of change required across all of the various operating functions. In the starts and stops, 3 to 18 months, W curve. Again, potential impact to retail and CPG is very high, and it's going to be very high based upon digital impact, based upon supply chain impact, based upon just how shoppers are going to shop, and again, a fair degree of change. And then basically on the last curve, the L-shaped curve, 2 to 5 years. Now, that's where you're seeing a huge amount of change in the organization. What I'd like you to think about, though, if you were to ask Tom Blishock specifically, where do I think the change is? Where do I think is the most likely curves that are going to occur? I'm going to pick the U-shape as a front runner, and then I'm going to pick the W-shape. So I'd like you all to do me a favor. Just spend a minute and do a survey. Which curve do you believe will most likely happen? Curve number 3, swoosh shape. Curve number 2 comes in second. Thank you very much. I'll adjust my comments going forward, but thank you very much for that feedback. So we wanted to understand how consumers were going to change. And we've given a few thought processes here around behaviors. Now, let's be very clear. Not all of these behaviors are going to occur. But in your strategic planning, so if you're a retailer, dealing with, how does personal safety play into my retail environment? If you happen to be, a manufacturer that's concerned about online shopping, as well as a retailer concerned about offline shopping, how you deal with fulfillment and delivery innovation. We are going to have continued underemployment and unemployment. How do you deal with that? And there will be a radical increase in home lifestyles, cooking, exercising, entertainment, home work-ready homes. So if you happen to be a retailer and you happen to be sort of saying, how am I going to serve the home differently? These are things that you want to, in your strategic planning, you're going to want to at least consider these. Now, health telemedicine, including auto replenishment. If you were to ask me the things on here which are going to be the biggest players, the biggest issues in the market, I would talk about personal safety, I would talk about online, and I would talk about health and medical as being a fundamental shifts to the economy and very, very fundamental shifts to how you go to market. Change in focus on shoppers, change in focus on channels. Where do you invest? Where do you de-invest? So one of the issues here is win with the winners while avoid losing with the losers. How are shopping changes occurring? How are lifestyle changes? What is economic stability like? And how adaptable are we to those changes? So it's critical for all of you on this call to think through, again, a checklist. How will we change our focus? Workplace, similar kind of restructuring. Safety, including mask, working from home as a standard. Now, we've given you some ideas about 2021, 2020, 21, and 2022. But be very clear, not all of these are going to come into play. But from our perspective, working from home becomes a new standard. There will be an absolute requirement for skills, retraining, restructuring, and learning. We also see a whole new model of headquarters 2.0, new access models, more immediately configurable space. But be very clear in this model here, when we look at workplace changes, there is a fair amount of organizational and operational restructuring required based upon your vote of the swoosh curve. What happens in retail and manufacturing? Well, we're very clear about this. And I'm going to start with the right side of the screen first. Cost must come out. Collaboration must radically improve. Shopper experience is absolutely the key. 360-degree transparency, not only to the consumer, but between trading partners is critical, and innovation. Now, let me start on the left side just for a second here. Restructured stores. Most of the retail clients I have are asking about restructuring of the stores. How do I make the space more efficient? So again, let's be very clear. In work that we did with the Food Marketing Institute, with Nielsen, it was very clear that 40% of center store is going to go online. We're not changing that projection. And that deals with the whole issue of restructuring what space looks like, how effective is it, how do we invest in the perimeter, how do we invest stores within a store. This impact of digital continues, and we think that's a permanent change. One of the things that concerns me a lot on this slide is Redesign Collaboration. I'd like everybody on the call in your meetings over the next few days and next weeks to ask yourself, how would we take out 30% of the cost of our current collaboration model? How do we make data and analytics a core new competency? How do we share capabilities? How do we have a single version of the truth? Because if you don't take out that level of cost in the current collaboration model, what we're going to find is a race to the bottom. Increased focus on seamless shopping experience. Without question, the consumer has said, we're going to shop anywhere we want to shop. Every single manufacturer that I work with today and retailer I work with today is talking about SKU rationalization. Do we need the 12 ounce, the 14 ounce, the 16 ounce, the 20 ounce, the 22 ounce? Most of the manufacturers saying no. Some of the retailers are saying no. I was in a recent store with 104 SKUs of mouthwash. Let me suggest to you, I'm not going to shop 104 SKUs of mouthwash. Finally, supply chain will be the nemesis of all of us. Thinking about how we build a supply chain, and in your conversations, ask each other, how are we going to optimize our supply chain to support the multiple options? And finally, innovation, without question. Innovation to me in formats and categories and items. We do not need the next great kumquat banana, strawberry, pear drink. What we need is new kinds of merchandising innovation in the stores to help keep traffic in the stores and actually grow traffic. So all of these on the left-hand side here are activities that retailers and manufacturers must be thinking about. And the one that I would spend over the next few days focusing on most is redesign collaboration and innovation. So proposed next 30 to 60, 90-day steps, pretty clear. Everybody on this call, I want to tell you that time is not a friend, because this issue of flexibility, this issue of uncertainty is absolutely critical. So we recommend the following to people. Think hard about the cash needs for operations and investments, because there is no clear path forward. Although we think the swoosh curve is correct, we're unsure. I would ask everyone here on the call to scenario plan for the best and worst case for your organization. So if you pick the swoosh curve, then ask yourself, what's the next most likely curve you're going to pick? And then thirdly, begin to think about how to take cost out. But more importantly, begin to, at least over the next few days, think about how we streamline not only the overall operating model, but the collaboration model. So the recommendations here are not a panic plan. They are a plan for what we see as real and profitable growth. Again, conserving cash, planning for what you think the future is. I will tell you, in many cases, I am uncomfortable with much of the projections on how consumers are going to behave or how the industry is going to behave. I'm more concerned about you preparing for what I think is probably going to be another period of uncertainty. Okay, thank you for your time this morning. I hope this was productive. If you have questions, please forward it to GMDC. And you have my email on the bottom here. If you have something specific you want to talk about, please feel free to do that. So again, thank you for the time.